This was the Dubberly family before 1988. They lived a happy life in Alturas, Florida, in the United States. They went to church every Sunday and were very close to the image of the perfect family. On June 14th, 16-year-old Dwayne Dubberly walked to the family's mailbox and found a letter. He opened the paper and his body froze. The text ordered that his family leave Florida, otherwise they would all die. In the end, the sender made it clear that this was not a joke. Dwayne carried the threat inside and showed it to his mother, Peg. Frightened, she shared the information with her husband. Unlike his wife and son, the man believed it was just a prank. Even though the text clearly stated that it was not, the letter was thrown into a drawer and forgotten. On October 23rd, 4 months later, Peg, the mother of the family, became ill. She experienced nausea, extreme pain, and significant hair loss. Her condition worsened over time, but for some reason her husband refused to take her to the hospital. The following week, Peg fell into a coma. Shortly after, Dwayne, the boy who had found the letter, began to show the same symptoms. On December 2nd, the cause of Peg's illness was identified as exposure to high doses of thallium, a chemical widely used in rat poison. With another family member showing the same symptoms, they were all sent to the laboratory. The tests came back positive, indicating high levels of thallium in the bodies of every family member, including the father who had refused to take his wife to the doctor. The threat received by mail returned to the family's memory. They had not left Florida, and the sender was fulfilling the promise. The family was heading toward the end, beginning with the mother. The case reached the newspapers and became a mystery. Several theories were created, but the police were unable to fully pursue any of them. Perhaps the case would still be unsolved today if not for the skills of an undercover agent. She was used as a point of contact in an operation that had only one chance to solve the case, and they already had a suspect. Poisoning homicide is rare as it requires knowledge and access to the victim. Unlike firearms or blades, this is a slow method with no direct contact. It requires planning and preparation, suggesting that the criminal did not act on impulse but out of a desire for revenge. And without knowing it, he was now face to face with a police officer. The year was 1988. 16-year-old Dwayne Dubberly had lived a happy life with his family. His mother, Peg, worked as a waitress at a local restaurant. After many years raising her 3 children alone, she met Carl, the father figure. He also came from another relationship and already had 2 children. Peg and Carl fell in love and moved into a home in Alturas, Florida. That was how the Dubber family joined the Carr family. At the time, it was a peaceful place where door locks were barely used, until then. In the early hours of October 3rd, Peg said goodbye to her children and left for work. Just minutes after arriving at the restaurant, she began complaining of a burning sensation in her legs and feet, followed by severe chest pain. Her boss immediately took her to the nearest hospital. Nearly incapacitated, Peg was kept under observation and a blood sample was collected for analysis. However, all results came back negative. This made a diagnosis impossible. Peg showed slight improvement after the initial care. The doctor prescribed pain medication and she was released. Peg went straight home and her symptoms worsened. She had difficulty keeping her eyes open and felt constant nausea. On October 30th, Peg, her son Dwayne, and her stepson Travis were rushed to Winter Haven Hospital. All of them showed the same symptoms: severe dehydration, pain, and nausea. Dwayne and Travis cried in pain and only calmed down after receiving medication. They described it as feeling like needles were piercing their feet and legs. Peg's condition was even more severe, and she was sent directly to the ICU. In cases like this, when an entire family shows signs of poisoning, one of the doctor's main concerns is contamination of public resources. Fearing that this could be the beginning of something much worse, the hospital called in infectious disease specialist Robert Van Hook. He examined Peg and noticed alarming hair loss. Everything pointed to poisoning, but the laboratory results were unable to identify the substance. That was when Robert decided to run a specific test for something he had only seen in medical textbooks during university. He tested for thallium, and to his surprise, the result came back positive. This substance had been widely used in rat poison until 1972, when its use was banned in the United States. Ingestion can lead to episodes of delirium, paralysis, and death. At the time, treatment for thallium poisoning was very limited, and the lack of immediate intervention exposed the victim to a high risk of permanent neurological damage. Tests performed on Peg showed that her body contained 50 times the maximum amount a human could tolerate. On December 2nd, she fell into a coma. Travis was placed on a ventilator, and Dwayne showed no signs of improvement. Among the three, he appeared to be the most resistant. During one night, Dwayne woke up hysterical and asked the nurses if he could see his mother. To calm the boy, they agreed. Peg's condition was extremely serious. She had large bald patches on her head and weighed little more than 40 kilograms. A nurse placed a cap on her head to minimize the visual impact. She told Dwayne that her mother could hear him and that he could talk to her if he wanted. While the boy talked to his mother in a coma, the police began to act. Detective Ernie Mintz from the Polk County Sheriff's Office was assigned to the case. Public resources had not been contaminated, and no other citizens had been admitted to the hospital with similar symptoms. The poisoning was now seen as attempted homicide. But there was even a bigger problem. Because the substance was illegal, the police were unable to immediately trace its buyer. It was impossible to know how much had been purchased or if the suspect had the knowledge required to handle and store the product. Likewise, it was unknown whether there were more intended victims. For that reason, it became more important to find the substance than the criminal himself. At that moment, several teams were formed and deployed to different locations of interest. Among them were the restaurant where Peg worked, the city's water supply, and a local farm. These places were analyzed by specialists, but no traces of thallium were found. The case reached the newspapers, spreading panic through loose headlines. Afraid to leave their homes, the population demanded answers from the authorities, placing even more pressure on an investigation that was already overwhelmed. They did not know how Peg and her children had come into contact with the substance, a crucial piece of information to move the case forward. The only thing they all had in common was the house. Still fearing that more people might arrive at the hospital with symptoms of poisoning, another team headed to the family's residence. Samples of water, trash, food leftovers, and even dust from common areas were collected. In total, more than 400 items were removed from the house by forensic teams. Each one was taken to the laboratory until traces of thallium were found in one of the items, a package containing 6 bottles of soda, 3 of them still sealed. The containers were opened and analyzed by experts. The results indicated approximately 1 gram of thallium in each bottle, enough to cause the death of an adult. Faced with this information, only 2 possible scenarios existed. The first was that the sodas had been contaminated at the factory, intentionally or not. This was the least likely scenario, but also the most lethal, as it would put not only the city but the entire country at risk. Somehow, this information reached the media during the investigation, and the impact was immediate. Everyone became afraid to consume soda, and Coca-Cola sales dropped rapidly. The company made itself available for inspections, allowing the entire production and bottling process to be analyzed. The entire operation was reviewed by the state. No evidence of thallium was found, and it was confirmed that it was physically impossible for the product to be tampered with at the factory. This left investigators with only the second scenario. It was a targeted attack on the Carr family. This brought different problems. In addition to knowledge to acquire and handle the substance, the perpetrator also needed access to the residence. This narrowed the police's focus, and they already had their first suspect, Carr. He had refused to take his wife to the hospital and did not show the same degree of symptoms. The police began digging into his life in search of a motive. Peg and Carl had been married for 7 months, and the honeymoon period was shorter than expected. He worked in a mine and began working long hours of overtime almost every day. Peg became suspicious and started investigating, until one night she found Carl with another woman. Infidelity emerged as a motive, but the investigation was only beginning. Conveniently, Carl was traveling for work when Peg's symptoms began. He returned from his trip to find his wife already ill and still refused to take her to the hospital. In addition to motive, the police now had a possible fabricated alibi. Putting himself out of town when his wife became sick could have been an attempt to distance himself from the image of a murderer, which in this case only made him more suspicious. According to Carl's children, he never shed a single tear while his wife was in the hospital. Everyone already knew about the infidelity and believed the poisoning had been used as a way out of the marriage. There was only one piece of information that cast doubt on Carl's involvement: the poisoning of his own son, Travis. There were far less extreme ways to leave that relationship. And even if Carl had chosen to kill Peg, it made no sense for his son to be affected as collateral damage, even though that detail gave the appearance of innocence, as it initially did. In the end, his son was still his son. Carl was taken in for questioning and provided information that caused even more confusion for the police. He brought up a letter delivered to his home on June 14th, months before Peg showed her first symptoms. His son had found the letter in the mailbox. Inside was a yellow powder containing a threat. The text read as follows: "You and your so-called family have 2 weeks to leave Florida forever. Otherwise, you will all die. This is not a joke." The letter was sent to the family's residence on Outer Road, Barton, number 2690, in Florida. It was addressed to Carr, however, his name was spelled incorrectly, a simple but important detail. The investigation considered the possibility that Carl had sent the letter to himself. However, deliberately spelling one's own name would require an unusually high level of manipulation. This led the police to a second hypothesis: someone close enough to know the family, but distant enough to not know how to spell their names correctly. That was when the detective discovered a strange event that had occurred years earlier. The family had 2 dogs, and both had died suddenly, weeks apart. They became severely ill, vomited frequently, and lost great amounts of fur. Whoever did this appeared to be testing the substance on the dogs before attacking the family, once again requiring access to the property. Back at the hospital, Dwayne, Travis, and Peg were not responding to treatment. Other family members were tested, and the results came back positive, including Peg's 2-year-old granddaughter. Almost everyone had thallium in their system. Carl was among those affected, and that was enough to remove him from the suspects list. It takes specific knowledge to store and handle substances like thallium. Simple contact can cause irreversible damage. Anyone with that knowledge would never risk ingesting the substance, as Carl had. Regardless of the dose, infidelity no longer seemed like sufficient motivation for him to risk his own life and that of his children. He was reclassified as a victim, On March 3, 1989, 5 months after the poisoning, Duane was invited to sit beside his mother one last time. There was no longer hope for Peg, and all that remained was goodbye. The doctor declared brain death and announced that she would not wake from the coma. The family was forced to make the difficult decision of whether to turn off the machines. After their farewell, the machines were shut down and the woman's lungs emptied for the final time. Peg Carr died at the age of 41 from brain death caused by thallium poisoning in 1989 inside Bartow Memorial Hospital. The woman's death destroyed the family. They eventually separated, and her brothers were sent to live with relatives. Peg's children were deeply affected as well. But the police now had a homicide to solve, and the FBI took over the case. By examining the contaminated bottles, investigators noticed small marks around the edge of the caps, damage caused by the perpetrator during the process. It was clear that there had been an effort to open the containers with minimal impact, attempting to make the contamination imperceptible. Thallium is tasteless, odorless, and easily soluble. When added to soda, it normally causes foaming, makes the liquid overflow, slightly alters its color, and creates sediment at the bottom of the bottle. However, the substance used in this case had been altered to avoid these effects. This pointed to someone with sophisticated knowledge of chemistry and access to a minimally equipped location. The police were now looking for someone meticulous, intelligent, and difficult to catch. With an empty suspect list, the investigation returned to the beginning. Officers contacted virtually every resident in the area. The closest neighbors were the couple George Treppel and his wife Diana. From the very first interaction, the police sensed that something was off. Even knowing about Peg's tragic death, George appeared angry when referring to his former neighbors. He complained about the children who played nearby and the noise they made. In investigations like this, it is common for police to ask the same question to different individuals. Why do you think someone would poison this woman? The purpose of this question is to uncover suspects and motives. The most common response from innocent people is usually, "I don't know, I have no idea," or something similar. George gave a different answer. Someone wanted them to leave. It was a message similar to the one left in the family's mailbox. The problem was that at that time, the note had not yet become public knowledge. Only investigators, the victims, and of course the perpetrator knew about it. With that response, George placed himself under suspicion, an unexpected behavior for someone who had so far appeared intelligent. But it got worse. George was a self-taught chemist, and his wife Diana held a master's degree in chemistry. Both were members of Mensa, an elite society for people within the top 2% of the population in terms of IQ. They were undoubtedly very intelligent people, at least within their fields. Things were starting to make sense. But the police found more. They discovered that George had previously been through the prison system. He had worked as a chemist in a large methamphetamine laboratory, was discovered and sentenced to prison. One of the components frequently used in the manufacture of this drug is thallium. With this information, investigators returned to speak with the surviving family members. Duane appeared surprised at the accusation against the neighbor, but recalled several arguments with George over loud music. The noise produced by the family seemed to deeply bother him and was a recurring point of conflict. 48 hours after one of these arguments, Peg showed the first symptoms of poisoning. The police were now certain they had found the person responsible, but they still lacked enough evidence to arrest him. One way to obtain such evidence is through interrogation. As it was an important tool, it must be used at the right time and with the right subject. George was introverted, avoided conflict, highly intelligent, and had been arrested before. He knew the system. Investigators concluded that bringing him in for interrogation would likely do more harm than good. He would likely refuse to answer questions, and once aware he was a suspect, he would be free to flee or destroy possible evidence. That was when the FBI proposed a solution: infiltrate an undercover agent into George's life to extract the truth. It was a risky and incredibly complex operation. This difficult task was assigned to Special Agent Susan Gorick. George had a photographic memory, so it was crucial that he had never seen her or her vehicle before. He was highly skilled at recognizing faces, and the police had only one chance. The FBI placed Susan in the role of a Mensa member, understanding that this would be the best way to insert the agent into George's life. It was a natural filter, a place she attended voluntarily, designed to connect people, the perfect environment to meet someone by accident. Susan Gorick adopted the identity of Cherry Green, a woman on the verge of filing for divorce from an abusive husband. Wearing this mask, the agent attended a Mensa event organized by George and his wife Diana. Susan arrived at the hotel where the meeting would take place. She was greeted by the host, George, establishing her first direct contact with the suspect. Susan had previously been part of the surveillance team and had followed George several times. Her fear was that she might be recognized, but that did not happen. She registered for the event and received a pamphlet written by George himself. Ironically, the theme of the event was crime. Participants would arrive at a fictional, altered crime scene and take on the role of investigators to determine who the murderer was. One of the scenarios created by the couple involved poisoning. And it didn't stop there. In the instructions for this poisoning scenario, the following passage was written: "When a death threat appears at someone's door, prudent people throw away their food and pay attention to what they eat. People rarely die by magic. Many items left at doors are simply neighbors saying, 'I don't like you, move away.'" This was no coincidence. Susan knew she was face to face with the criminal and needed to be extremely careful. It wasn't just the operation at risk, her life was as well. During the event, she approached George again and managed to initiate a second interaction. She told him that her husband was a lawyer from Houston, Texas, and that she had left him because of abuse. She then said she intended to move to Florida and discovered that George and his wife had similar plans. They were also putting their house up for sale. This was both a problem and an opportunity. Susan contacted her supervisor, who decided to extend the operation beyond the event. Susan maintained the role of Cherry Green and showed interest in the house. The scenario was perfect. She needed a place to live, and the couple was selling the property. This was an opportunity for the agent to gain access to the residence and possibly find something suspicious enough to obtain a warrant. They scheduled a visit, and Susan went to George's home. He showed her around the house until they reached an office that served as a library. In this room, George revealed a small hidden passage behind the books. This path led to another room, apparently used for intimate acts. Susan was greeted by a mannequin and several items associated with submission. The tour ended, and unfortunately she was unable to find anything suspicious enough to secure a warrant. Disappointed, she left the location while continuing to express interest in the house. Susan arranged a series of meetings with George. They had lunch together several times at different restaurants. She was monitored from a distance by a support team, but the danger posed by George was not physical confrontation, it was knowledge. Every time she stood up to go to the bathroom, Susan never touched her food again. If George discovered that she was a police officer, he could attempt to poison her as well. By the time symptoms appeared, he would already be gone. She managed to string George along for 8 months. During these meetings, she collected small pieces of evidence and behavioral insights. Most importantly, she gained his trust. George harbored a deep hatred for people he considered less intelligent than himself. Confrontation was never an option in his life. He expected people to understand messages like the note left for Peg's family. Even clear to him, they were absurd without context or a sender. That was the method he chose to deal with people who brought noise to his doorstep. Infiltrations like the one Susan was conducting are extremely dangerous, and the agent's life is of utmost importance to the Bureau. It is common for investigations to be shut down when they fail to produce results, in order to preserve the agent's safety. It is also common for undercover officers to clash with supervisors in an effort to gain more time, not just to avoid operational failure, but because emotional connections inevitably form. Operations of this nature always raise concern among supervisors. 8 months had already passed, and Susan needed to deliver results. In December 1989, she received the call she had been waiting for. George and Diana were moving away. An unmarked mobile surveillance team followed the couple, and Susan obtained the house key. She completed the purchase through the state, which meant she no longer needed a warrant to bring forensic teams to the location. George and Diana left, and the police entered. Susan managed to convince the couple to leave behind what they no longer wanted and offered to dispose of the rest. As a result, a large quantity of items remained in the residence. Boxes and more boxes of vials and substances were collected and taken for analysis. The substance they were looking for was thallium. George and Diana were intelligent and were not expected to have left that product behind. Because of that, forensic investigators went straight to the drains and the air conditioning filters. Samples were collected and sent to the laboratory. In January 1990, Susan received word from her supervisor that her time was up. The laboratory had not yet analyzed all the samples, and the operation had already dragged on for too long. That was when Susan used a desperate strategy. She arranged a new reading with George in a picnic area behind a McDonald's. Her goal was to make him confess. The meeting was recorded from a distance, and the audio was captured by hidden devices in Susan's clothing. She said that the police had appeared at her door, talking about an investigation involving the woman murdered in the neighboring house. Acting casually, Susan appeared worried and asked why George had not warned her earlier. He then said that she did not need to worry because there was no one poisoning others in the area, but that the case had happened out of personal revenge. The problem was that the investigation had not yet been concluded. George could not have had that information unless he was the culprit. That was the closest thing to a confession she would obtain. Susan handed George a card that a detective had supposedly left at her door and said they were looking for him. Immediately, his behavior changed. He became visibly agitated and began asking a series of questions, all aimed at finding out whether he was considered a suspect or not. At the end of the conversation, George asked Susan to visit his new house. He insisted, but she refused. There was no reason for that invitation, which was suspicious at the very least. The interaction ended at approximately 11:30 a.m., and George quickly left the area. On April 4, 1990, the laboratory results were finalized. In one of the containers found in George's former house, police detected traces of modified thallium, the same mixture found in the bodies of Peg and her family. The following day, multiple patrol cars surrounded a residence in Sebring. George Trapal was arrested. He was briefly evaluated by a doctor at the local hospital and then transferred to an interrogation room. The person who walked through the door was his most recent friend, Cherry Green. She revealed that her real name was Susan Gorek and that she was a special agent. George was intelligent enough to understand exactly what that meant. Susan collected a handwriting sample and left the room. The criminal's new residence was searched, and like the previous one, it also had a secret room with no doorknob on the inside. The only window in that room was sealed from the outside. Inside the small space was a bed with pieces of wood nearby, likely used as anchor points for ropes or restraints. A pulley system was being installed in the room, and it became clear that the objective was to torture people. That structure was a bridge between reality and the disturbed fantasies of a criminal. Had Susan accepted the invitation to visit, she might have been the first victim. It is impossible to say what George's intentions truly were, but the FBI believes it prevented the birth of a monster. As often happens in cases like this, his wife Diana claimed she knew nothing. George Trepal's trial began in January 1991. In addition to all the evidence already presented, investigators also recovered a manual on poisons among George's belongings. One passage specifically stated that thallium is the substance of choice for criminals. Handwritten notes by George were found stating that he would take revenge on his neighbors. A total of 55 fingerprints were collected from the book, all matching the defendant. The tools used to carefully open the bottles were also presented. The piece that matched the marks on the bottle caps was the only one missing from the kit. During the trial, George remained calm and even smiled at times. He knew exactly what he was doing, what the symptoms would be, and that a 2-year-old baby had been exposed to the poison, and still showed no remorse. George destroyed a family, took the life of a woman, and nearly killed children simply because he was bothered by the noise of his neighbors, without ever attempting other ways to resolve the problem. His only comment was that less intelligent people should not have the right to live. He never explained how he gained access to the house to contaminate the soft drinks. On March 6, 1991, George Trepal was found guilty of obstruction of justice, 1 count of murder, and 7 counts of attempted murder. Peg's 3 children, her granddaughter, her father, and her 2 sons were among the victims. George was sentenced to death by electric chair. He was transferred to Union Correctional Institution in Florida and is one of the inmates confined to death row. His defense filed dozens of appeals, all of which were denied, the last one in 2012. His wife was never charged. Susan Gorek put herself in Peg's place and risked her own life to bring justice to the family. She nearly ended up in a torture chamber, and for that she received many honors and commendations. It is rare for undercover agents to be revealed for obvious reasons. This ended her career as an infiltrator, but began a new phase in a higher-ranking position within the agency. Peg's father, her children, and her granddaughter survived, despite the tragedy. They were able to continue their lives knowing that, at the very least, justice had been served. Today, at 73 years of age, George Trepal remains incarcerated on death row in Union Correctional Institution in Florida, awaiting his execution.